Let's see. Good morning, everyone. How are you? This is Enrique Sanchez of Spanish United. Today we have a very special guest for our show. Would you be kind enough and introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me on, Enrique. My name is Tom Gabor, and I'm a former professor of criminology and an international consultant on issues of violence and gun violence, and an author of a number of books. And maybe we'll, during the course of this conversation, discuss my upcoming book. So I'll leave it to Enrique to ask about it.
Sure, not a problem. Again, like we spoke in the email, one of the reasons why I brought you on the show, because in the last, as you know, in the last couple of days or weeks, we've been having mass shooting after mass shooting, and this has gotten to the point that is no longer a social issue, but it's becoming a national security issue. And we in Spanish United, we try to promote harmony between the different groups, and we also are involved in a lot of social justice work. But at the same time, we are concerned about the issue of gun violence, especially unrestricted access to weapons of war, as I will call it. So from your experience working in advocating gun control and gun reform, what is the problem in our country that we have so many issues with gun violence and the unrestricted access to weapons of war?
Well, there are problems at a number of levels, Enrique. We have the highest inventory of firearms on the planet, in the hands of civilians. There's about 400 million guns in the hands of 330 million Americans. Of course, not everybody has one, but a segment of our society has multiple firearms. We also have some of the weakest gun laws. You have to look at it state by state, because some states have weaker laws or stronger laws than others. But where we're particularly an outlier, apart from this large inventory of civilian-owned firearms, we're an outlier in the sense that laws relating to carrying guns, really, you don't see those types of laws anywhere else. Not among more than, in other words, right now, we have about 26 states that allow people to carry a firearm without any permit whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
There's no training, no extra background check, no reference checks, nothing. Basically, unless you're somebody with a felony record or some other reason that you're a prohibited person, prohibited from having firearms. Illness would be another one. You can, if you can own a firearm and buy a firearm, you can also carry without any additional training. And in most of the remainder of the state, including my state, which is Florida, the requirements for a permit are at such a low level. I've done the course myself. You simply cannot be prepared to use a firearm for self-defense based on the type of training, if you can call it that we have here in Florida, where you have a 3-hour course, fire 5 shots down the range. There's no test of marksmanship, no test of your retention of material in the class. And so you may not have any idea when it's appropriate to use lethal force. And the way you go, you're carrying a gun. We're an outlier in one other way, and that is, at least, is that we have so many weapons of war. I like your use of that term, because in fact, many of these AR-15s, for example, that you see in some of the most high casualty mass shootings, were actually designed for the military. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there are handguns also that have been designed for the military. And usually one of the characteristics of these military style weapons is that they can receive these high capacity magazines that can feed the gun with many rounds, more than 10 rounds, and sometimes as many as 100 rounds. The shooter doesn't need to reload. And we see that when, for example, some of the audience might remember the shooting as one illustration, the shooting in the Century Theater in Aurora, Colorado, a number of years ago, and 70 people were gunned down, either killed or injured in the course of a couple of minutes. So you can commit that kind of harm with a traditional gun that holds 6 bullets.
Right.
So these are some of the ways in which the U.S. is different from other countries. And it seems now, you mentioned the spree we've had of mass shootings. The last 3 years, shootings have really surged in number, but we're also seeing more high casualty shootings. And there's a concern that there's what we call a contagion effect, that individuals who are, let's say, predisposed to some kind of dramatic act of violence, it gives them ideas, and they study previous shooters. And the more shooters that are out there, the more the message gets out to people who are more unstable, for example, or people who are prepared to commit some kind of grievous harm. It gives them a sort of a script, it puts in their mind that this is a normal way to act. And, if you have these strong grievances, we're normalizing these mass shootings. So those are some of the ways in which we differ from other countries.
Right. And another thing that is of concern to me is the fact that a lot of the weapons that are being used, like you said, it is unrestricted. And many conversations that I had with many people, both people that are for and against gun control, is it has to do with common sense. Like, I understand if someone wants to, have a gun, for self-defense in their home, or let's say in their business, let's say for the sake of argument, it's allowed. But I don't think a weapon of war has any productive purpose. Same way a weapon of war has no productive purpose in hunting a deer. It has no productive purpose because those types of weapons, the bullets are made to pierce armor, to pierce metal. And, it just does not make any sense why people want to own these types of weapons, especially when it has no productive purpose. It's those weapons of war is to kill people, especially when there is a war and somewhere, it's not used for self-defense. And also another fact is that the majority of the people that have owned weapons of war, semi-automatic rifles, that have committed mass shootings, the vast majority of them have purchased them legally. And in the case of Anthony Cruz in Parkland, Florida, which I'm sure you're aware of, prior to him committing that horrible massacre, not only did he purchase these semi-automatic weapons legally, he had a record of threatening people at his school. He had a history of being unstable. And prior to him committing the shooting, he was staying with a family or friends of a family because both of his parents had passed. His adopted parents had passed away. And they had no problem with him having those weapons inside of the house, and knowing that he had, behavior problems. So it's like, it's not the fact that there is an issue of lack of gun control, but there is also an issue of personal responsibility. In my personal opinion, there is a lot of people that are just completely lax and irresponsible with their weapons. Like, there was another case in Virginia where a 6-year-old boy shot his teacher and a few other people at a school, and he got the weapon legally from his mother, that his mother purchased legally. It's like, I don't know how he got access to it. How did he disarm the lock, if it had a lock, which I doubt that the gun had a lock. It's but it's the fact that people are just very irresponsible with.
Absolutely agree with that, Enrique. Well, there's the personal responsibility, and in fact, yes, many shootings, school shootings in particular, are committed by young people who are either still students at that school or often recently graduated from that school, and they obtained the weapon from either the home of their parents,
Mhm.
which is often their home, or a home of a family member or some relative. And, when you talk about getting these guns legally, I couldn't agree with you more. What I think we need, besides a quick background check, because I think your audience should know that your standard background check in this country. So even if somebody's purchasing legally, it's usually about 2 minutes. So the dealer will contact, usually it's the FBI,
Mhm.
or sometimes there's a state law enforcement agency that does the check, and they look at 3 computer databases, and often those databases are incomplete, to make
Mhm.
sure that the person doesn't have a criminal conviction. But in the case of Cruz, as you've mentioned, and in the case of others, there are many other disturbing factors, and certainly clues that we're dealing with somebody who is capable of such action. In fact, in Cruz's case, many of his schoolmates indicated that if there was going to be a mass shooting in the school, he was going to be the one to commit it. He made threats of shootings. He showed a lot of instability, and even the FBI had been informed of his conduct in the past. But what happens is when we're doing the standard background checks today, we just look at these 3 FBI databases, and if there's no criminal conviction, the sale proceeds. That's why I think it's so important uh, to have what we normally call a licensing system. You have this in most other countries where you don't only look at the criminal record of an individual, but you do reference checks.
Mhm.
People who know this individual could be family members, could be co-workers, could be friends, and so forth. So you conduct those checks. In Canada, the spouse or former spouse of an individual applying for a gun license is notified of the application. So they can bring to the attention of authorities if there was domestic violence. Because as I'm sure you know, uh, uh, domestic violence related shootings are many. And so, you get through these reference checks and
Mhm.
law enforcement interviews and those other things that are done in the licensing system. You pick up more information about the individual than you would with this quick and dirty um, FBI check that we do in this country. It was designed by the NRA, National Rifle Association, by the way.
Right, right. I agree with you. And also another thing that needs to be done is that there needs to be the loopholes of buying weapons online also needs to be closed, because a lot of people purchase their weapons online legally, and again, that's even quicker than buying it at, let's say, at a gun show or buying it at a gun shop, because they don't even ask who you are. They just give it to you and that's it. That also that needs to be shut down, because that is also another loophole that many people do in purchasing weapons legally. If they cannot get it directly through a gun dealer or through a gun show, is that they get it online. That's another issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, all private sales according to federal law. It's quite perverse law, that requires an individual to get a background check if you buy through a dealer, but if you buy from somebody off the street, from a friend, as you say, online, or a gun show, um, through somebody other than a licensed dealer, you don't require a background check. So that's rather perverse. And I think that's obviously one of the loopholes that must be closed immediately.
Mhm. And also another concern is that gun violence is also a big problem in the Hispanic community, especially when it comes to gangs and domestic violence. And as contrary to popular belief, most Hispanics are adverse to gun possession because they know what it has done in their communities. Like you see what happens with the cartels, with the gangs, where people they just kill each other and people are collateral damage in drive-by shootings. So I don't believe that if every Hispanic had a gun would be a good thing, because there is an issue of domestic violence and alcohol and drug abuse in our community, which is very chronic. And God forbid if everyone had weapons, then it will be much more dangerous. It's like we have to deal with the issue of the gangs in our communities, but having to deal with just regular people that, for any little thing, they'll just shoot someone to resolve the dispute, especially when there's alcohol involved. It's a real problem.
Absolutely agree with that, Enrique. And one of the things that's concerning me since the pandemic began was we saw an increase. There's insecurity, people are more on edge, and many people weren't working and so forth. So we did see a surge in violence during that time, and a surge in mass shootings as well. And one of the things that concerns me is that we've seen an increase in gun ownership among people of color as well as among women. So I completely agree with you that, the gun lobby over the last 30 years has been quite successful in selling a narrative to the public that your home is safer with a gun.
Mhm.
All the evidence that I've seen is to the contrary, because yes, from time to time you can use a gun successfully for self-defense. But for every defensive gun use, there are about 10 to 15 at least criminal gun uses. So,
Mhm.
for example, one study showed that for every time a homeowner kills an intruder with a gun, there's 22 shootings of individuals in the home, either domestic violence, suicides, or unintentional accidental shooting. So for every time an intruder is shot by a gun in the home, there's 22 times more individuals who live in that home who are shot with that gun. So yes, there from time to time, a gun can be used for self-defense, but it's far more often used in a criminal fashion or accidentally or in a suicide. It does make a difference in suicides. And by the way, the audience should know that about 60% of all gun-related deaths in the country are suicide.
Mhm.
And the presence and access to lethal means makes a successful suicide more likely. So while overdoses, about 2%, people who try to overdose and commit suicide that way, only 2% are successful. With guns, it's close to 90%.
Oh, of
So,
course.
and sometimes people do not, often people do not repeat suicide attempts if they are not successful. So
Mhm.
the notion that it doesn't really matter if somebody's suicidal, whether they have a gun or not, they will end up killing themselves. That's not true at all, because for many people who commit suicide, they're going through some kind of personal crisis. And when that personal crisis passes, will no longer be at a high risk of committing suicide. So you don't get a second chance with a gun.
Of
I'm
course.
not recommending any other means of trying suicide, but certainly having the lethal means there makes it far more likely that people will kill themselves.
Right. And also another way to combat issues of gun violence is also to not only hold the NRA responsible, but also the individual gun shops and online dealers that sell guns knowingly or unknowingly to people that commit shootings, to make an accountability. Because it's like when someone does a mass shooting, for the most part, the one that sells the gun, I'm talking about like a gun dealer or a gun expo, they're not held liable. And I think there needs to be laws that make the the gun dealers liable, so that way it can serve as a deterrent to make sure that they just don't sell a gun to just anybody. Also, in addition to doing like a comprehensive background check that you were mentioning earlier.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Enrique, because in 2005, President George Bush at the time signed into law the it's a Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. And basically what that does is it shields the gun industry from liability unless a gun is defective. So if a gun does what it's supposed to do and kill and shoot, the industry can't be held liable. And this came about because the gun industry was being sued by cities for all the costs, the health care and other costs associated with gun violence. And so this is a unique situation where it's one of the only industries that has this kind of protection from liability. And that would make an enormous difference, because I think, it's a real challenge banning these assault style weapons, for example. But another way, apart from an outright ban, is to make it very unprofitable to the industry, where they could be sued if somebody uses, for example, an AR-15. And maybe the manufacturer and the dealer can be sued by victims of that shooting and families of that shooting. Mm-hmm. And the industry may come to the determination that it's financially devastating for them to sell these weapons. So that's more of a market-oriented approach. It's something I certainly support.
Yeah, because it's like the gun dealers and the manufacturers, they need to be held responsible because they're the ones that are producing these weapons for people to have, and a lot of them knowingly are selling these weapons to people that are unstable. It's like with any industry. It's at the end of the day, it comes down with profit. But as with any industry, there needs to be accountability for when these products are either defective or in this case they get into the wrong hands of people.
Exactly, and I think I agree with that. Not only should the gun industry be accountable, but I think when you're selling a product that's designed to kill, this is what the guns are designed for, mm-hmm. especially military style weapons. Mm-hmm. Then you need a higher level of accountability, not lower level, and you need higher standards in terms of the accountability that needs to be met. And unfortunately, if you look at one law, for example, passed under the Reagan administration, the Firearm Owners Protection Act, way back in the 1980s, mm-hmm. they tied the hands of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. That's the agency, the federal agency.
Yeah, ATF.
That enforces ATF, exactly, that enforces gun laws. And they are restricted to no more than one unannounced inspection of a dealer in any given year. And in fact, some dealers don't get inspected more than once every 10 years because that agency has also been stripped of a lot of resources. Mm-hmm. And so it's another problem because, they could be engaging in all kinds of illegal practices, mm-hmm. and not keeping books properly and so forth. But if the enforcers neither have the resources to do these unannounced inspections and even see whether they're prepared, these dealers, which we know from some research, a lot of dealers are prepared to sell to individuals who say that they're prohibited purchasers. Mm-hmm. then you're really in trouble if you don't have the resources and your hands are tied by laws that say you can only inspect a dealer once a year, even if they have a terrible record.
Mhm.
So that's very problematic.
Yeah, it is, because it's like, it starts to get corrupted, and it gets to a point that they'll even sell to kids if there's nobody watching them, or anything. They'll even sell to kids, because like I said, they're business people, and all they care about is making money, and they don't care who they sell it to, as long as they make a profit. So it's like, you're right, that is very scary. It is of concern, and there needs to be more funding and resources, particularly like into the ATF, when it comes to doing inspections of people that have gun shops that are not following the rules. And I also wanted to ask about your upcoming book that we had mentioned. Explain a little bit about what the book is about, because we only have like 10 minutes left into the interview.
Right. Yes, thank you, Enrique. So the name of the book is called American Carnage: Shattering the Myth That Fuel Gun Violence. And my co-author is Fred Gutenberg. You might have seen him on television lately. He's been on a lot with all the mass shootings.
Mhm.
He, very unfortunately, his daughter was one of the victims at the Parkland shooting back in 2018. So his 14-year-old daughter died, and he, along with some other parents, but I think he's the most active one, he's all over promoting gun violence prevention, or gun safety, as he calls it. So he's my co-author. And what the book is about, I think it's a very important point. And I wanted to make this point before we end today, is a lot of people feel helpless. They see every day a new mass shooting, Michigan State, Buffalo grocery store, El Paso, all over the country.
Monterey Park, Half Moon Bay.
Exactly, in California, and many different communities where we haven't sometimes seen, like the Asian community, haven't seen all that many mass shootings. And, the point I'd like to make is, yes, we can wait for Congress, and we know there's gridlock in Congress, and frankly, one party, and it's not being partisan, it's just being factual. You have the Democratic Party that's passed various gun laws over the last few decades, like the assault weapons ban under President Clinton, as well as the Brady background check. And you have a party, the Republican Party, that in my view has mostly looked after the interests of the industry and of gun owners. But, we can sit back helplessly and wait for Congress to act. But we can either be passengers and sit back and be helpless, or we can be drivers. And one of the things that's happened is, because of the narrative, if you will, that the gun lobby has put out over the last 30 years, trying to convince people that you're safer with a gun in the home, you're safer with a gun, you're safer carrying a gun, all these types of things, and assault weapons are really sporting guns, and all this nonsense. People are kind of resigning themselves to the fact that we can't do anything, and maybe guns are the only way to go. And you hear the slogans, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is with a good guy with a gun.
Right.
And all that. So what our book is designed to do is take on many of those myths through research. So we tackle about 37 of these myths, because we think we need a more informed public, first of all, that knows the real facts. But also, it's incumbent on everybody to vote, in my view, and also to vote, if you feel strongly about this issue, to vote for candidates who make very specific commitments about what will they will do and what legislation they will support if they get elected into office. So it's not enough to say, well, I'm going to support gun violence prevention. We should ask them, do you want to support an assault weapons ban? Do you support expanding background checks? Do you support laws requiring people to store guns safely in their home? Make them really specific, real specific commitments. Those are the people we need voted into office. And a more informed population, and that's where our role comes in, is very important, so people don't buy all these falsehoods that are being spread by the gun lobby and gun extremists. So that's what our book is all about. It talks about how you tackle misinformation as well, but we take on some of the major myths in this country. And by the way, one of the big ones is people think that it was a Wild West in the past in the United States, and actually gun laws were more strict in the Old West. They were more strict during the Revolutionary period. But people want you to think and not realize how extreme the gun laws are today. And they're becoming more extreme, more friendly to gun owners and gun carriers. And that's a real concern, because that's where you get, when people are carrying guns, and as Enrique said, sometimes drinking or in a rage, and they get into a fight, that can very quickly become deadly.
Oh,
So,
yes, absolutely.
Exactly. So unfortunately, many acts of violence happen that way, in an altercation, in a bar, in a party, in a house, and that type of thing. So we try to deal with some of those myths, and the book will be released in May, but if you're interested in taking a look at it, it's available for pre-order on Amazon, and I'm proud to say we're a #1 release on Amazon.
Perfect. I definitely look forward to getting your book signed and released when it comes out. Again, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show, Tom. I really appreciate it. And for the listeners, if anyone wants to reach out to me on Spanish United, where we are on social media. We are on Spanish United YouTube, Spanish United WhatsApp, Spanish United, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And again, thank you so much for being on the show, Thomas. It's a great pleasure having you. And as soon as I'm yes, and as soon as I'm done, I will send you the link to the podcast. Have yourself a wonderful day.
Great. Same to you. Thank you to your audience as well.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.